The workshop was hot, filled with the smell of iron and oil. A desert wind pushed dust under the door, swirling around the floorboards like ghosts. Alaric leaned over his bench, hammering a piece of metal into the shape he had pictured for weeks. Sweat ran down his back, but he didn't stop. Outside, horses stomped restlessly, and the town of Saint-Roch lay quiet under the red sky. He told himself this invention would be his escape, the thing that finally gave him freedom. Behind him, a soft voice broke the rhythm of hammer and fire. "Alaric," said Ophélie, his stepmother, her tone careful, almost trembling. He ignored her, pressing the hammer harder, sparks flying. He couldn't afford distractions, not now. She tried again, louder this time. "You haven't eaten since morning?" Her words floated like dust motes, unwanted and stubborn. Alaric clenched his jaw. He didn't look at her, didn't answer. The silence grew sharp between them, broken only by the hiss of iron cooling in water. He knew she wanted something she always did. A glance would mean surrender, so he kept his eyes fixed on the glowing steel. His heart pounded, not from the work but from the weight of her presence. He felt the heat of her stare on the back of his neck, heavy, unrelenting. Ophélie stepped closer, her boots scraping the wooden floor. "I'm talking to you, Alaric." Her voice cracked, carrying something deeper than hunger or chores. Something raw. He almost turned then, almost gave in. But the memory of his father's grave behind the chapel came flooding back, and the bitterness choked him. She had stood there too, dressed in black, tears on her face, but Alaric never trusted those tears. Now she stood in his workshop, in his silence, demanding space that wasn't hers. He struck the iron one last time, sparks flying, the sound sharp like a gunshot. The hammer slipped, grazing his knuckles. Blood welled up quick and bright. Alaric hissed through his teeth, dropping the tool. Ophélie gasped and reached for him, but he yanked his hand away before her fingers touched. "Don't," he growled. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, the fire, the wind, even the dust seemed to hang still. Their eyes met for the first time that day. Hers were glassy, rimmed red, as though she'd been fighting tears long before she entered. His were hard, full of questions he refused to ask. The silence between them was louder than any gunshot, more dangerous than any outlaw. Alaric wrapped his bleeding hand in a rag, turning back to the bench. Ophélie didn't move. She stayed there, standing with her hands curled tight against her dress, staring at him like she was holding a secret too heavy to keep. "You think you know everything, but you don't," she whispered. Her voice broke into the heat and the hammer's absence. Then she turned and left, the door creaking wide, letting in a flood of orange desert light before it slammed shut again. Alaric stood there, rag pressed to his hand, chest tight. He didn't know why, but her words echoed like thunder in his mind. The night fell heavy over Saint-Roch, painting the sky with deep purples and silver dust. Alaric sat by the workshop window, his bleeding hand bandaged in rough cloth, staring at the lamplight that flickered across the quiet street. The town was small, forgotten, surrounded by desert that swallowed men whole. He had grown up here, watching his father shape iron into tools and weapons, learning that steel listened only to the patient. But patience had left him the day his father died. Ophélie arrived soon after, stepping into their house with soft hands and a gaze that seemed too fragile for this land. To Alaric, she had never belonged, and her presence was a constant reminder of how quickly things could be replaced. That memory clawed back tonight, the funeral. The churchyard full of dust, the wooden cross fresh in the ground. Alaric remembered gripping the handle of his father's shovel until his knuckles bled. Ophélie had stood at his side, whispering promises that she would take care of him, that they could survive together. He had pulled away then just as he pulled away now. Survival wasn't something she could give him. It was something he had to forge with his own hands, one project, one invention, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. He could hear her moving in the kitchen now, through the thin walls of the workshop. Pots clattering, water pouring into a basin, the rhythm of a woman trying to keep busy when silence was too loud. Alaric tightened the cloth on his wound. He didn't need her food, didn't need her words. But the truth was harder. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days, not since he shut himself in with the iron. His invention wasn't just metal and fire, it was his escape from the hollow ache of being seen as a boy who had lost too much. He wanted the town to look at him not as the orphaned son, but as the man who built something that mattered. Still, her voice wouldn't leave his mind. "You think you know everything, but you don't." Why had she said it that way? With that crack of sorrow? Alaric rubbed his temple, frustrated. Secrets had no place in a house already broken by loss. But Ophélie had carried herself strangely all week, quiet, distracted, sometimes staring out the window as if she expected someone to ride into town. It stirred something uneasy in him, a feeling that went beyond annoyance. He pushed it aside, hammering the thought down like he hammered iron. Yet unease clung to him like smoke. When the lamplight died, Alaric finally left the workshop, stepping into the cool night air. The stars above stretched endless, bright and merciless. He walked past the churchyard, past the grave he never visited enough, past the wind that carried whispers only he could hear. And as he stood there, looking at the dry earth where his father lay, he made himself a promise. He would finish the project no matter what it cost and prove that he needed no one, not even her. But behind him, through the thin walls of their home, he could hear Ophélie crying softly into the night. Morning came harsh, with a burning sun rising over the flat roofs of Saint-Roch. Alaric wiped the grit from his eyes and stepped into the street, his wrapped hand throbbing but steady enough to carry the bundle of scrap he needed for the project. The town was stirring awake, wagons rattling over the dirt, merchants shouting prices, children chasing each other with sticks. Yet the air felt tense, as though something unseen rode in with the dawn. Alaric kept his head down, moving quick through the chatter. People still looked at him with that same mix of pity and distance. That's the blacksmith's boy, the one left behind. He hated it. He wanted them to see more. At the market square, he traded iron nails for a strip of brass, ignoring the old men who muttered by the water pump. Their voices carried, low but sharp. Strange riders spotted east of town, one said. Campfires on the ridge. Another spat in the dust. Could be outlaws. Could be worse. Alaric's chest tightened. He knew Saint-Roch was too poor to fight off raiders, too far from the law to expect help. Still, he kept silent, slipping the brass into his satchel. Danger was a constant shadow here, and he had learned not to flinch at every whisper. But when he turned to leave, he caught sight of Ophélie across the square. She wasn't buying food or cloth. She was speaking quietly with a tall man near the stables, his coat dark, his hat low over his face. The way she leaned in, the urgency in her eyes, it froze Alaric where he stood. She touched the man's sleeve as if begging, and the man shook his head before walking away, disappearing into the crowd. Ophélie looked around quickly, her gaze sharp, before hurrying back toward their house. Alaric's stomach twisted. Who was that man, and why had she looked so afraid? He walked home slower, his mind burning hotter than the sun above. Every step felt heavier. Was this the secret she carried? Was this what her words had meant last night? You think you know everything, but you don't. He replayed the scene in his head, her desperate eyes, the stranger's refusal. It didn't fit the woman who had spent years trying to keep their small home steady, cooking when food was scarce, stitching torn clothes until her fingers bled. She had always seemed fragile but honest. And yet something about that meeting felt like betrayal. By the time Alaric reached the workshop, his throat was dry with dust and suspicion. He set the brass on the table, but he couldn't bring himself to touch the hammer. The fire in the forge was out, cold and black, and for once he didn't relight it. Instead, he sat in the corner, staring at the door, waiting. The project could wait. Tonight he needed answers. The sun sank low, painting the town in rust and gold. Alaric stayed in the workshop, the air heavy with the smell of cooled iron and dust. Every creak outside made his pulse quicken. He had seen Ophelie's face at the market, the fear in her eyes when she spoke to that stranger, and it would not leave his mind. He sat with his bandaged hand clenched, waiting. The door finally opened, slow and cautious, and she stepped inside carrying a small sack of bread. Her smile was faint, too faint, as though she knew he had seen more than she should have shown. I bought supper, she said softly, setting the sack down. The silence between them pressed like a storm. Alaric didn't answer. His eyes burned into hers, sharp and demanding. Who was he? He asked at last, voice low, steady. She froze, her fingers still curled around the bread. For a long breath she didn't speak. Then she turned away, fussing with plates as though noise could cover the truth. Just a traveler, she whispered. But her hands shook and the lie was clumsy, fragile. Alaric stood, crossing the floor until the shadows of the firelight stretched across both of them. Don't lie to me. Ophelie's shoulders rose and fell as she struggled for words. You wouldn't understand, she said finally, her voice breaking like dry wood. It's not what you think. But that only cut deeper. He wanted to believe her, yet the memory of her desperate grip on the stranger's sleeve screamed otherwise. He felt the betrayal coil in his chest, heavy and sharp. Then make me understand, he pressed. For the first time she looked at him fully, her eyes wet, her mouth trembling. She opened it as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she let out a sob she couldn't hold back and rushed past him into her room, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the house, leaving Alaric standing alone in the dying light. His breath came fast, his chest tight with a mix of anger and confusion. He wanted to storm after her, to demand the truth, but something held him back, the fear that whatever she might say could break what little remained between them. Instead, he returned to the workshop, staring at the half-finished invention on his bench. His project had always been his escape, but now it felt like a shield, the only thing standing between him and the secret tearing its way out of Ophelie's silence. That night, the desert wind rose hard, rattling shutters, howling through the alleys of Saint-Roch like a warning. Alaric lay awake, listening to the storm outside and the muffled sound of Ophélie weeping behind her closed door. Every gust of wind sounded like hooves on the ridge, every cry like the voice of something about to arrive. He had wanted answers, but now he feared the truth might ride into town before dawn. Dawn broke with a sky the color of ash. Alaric was already awake, sitting at the forge with his invention in pieces before him, the fire dead and cold. His mind was restless, circling the same unanswered questions. Ophelie's tears, the stranger's refusal, her words about what he didn't know. The silence of the house pressed in, but beyond its walls, something else stirred. The sound reached him first faint, distant, like thunder rolling over stone. Not one, not two, but many. Alaric stepped outside, the dry wind clawing at his face, and looked east. On the far ridge, silhouetted against the pale morning, a line of riders moved slow and steady. Saint-Roch was still waking. A few merchants were opening stalls, sweeping dust from wooden porches, when they too noticed the movement on the ridge. Voices rose, sharp with fear. "Outlaws," someone hissed. "Too many." Alaric's stomach sank. He had heard stories of raiders who swept through poor towns like fire, taking what little they wanted and leaving nothing but ashes. He tightened his bandaged hand. The invention he worked on was no weapon yet, only pieces of an idea. And the town had little else, no sheriff, no soldiers, only men with rusted rifles and shaky hands. As Alaric stood frozen, Ophélie appeared beside him. She was pale, her eyes wide as if she had known this moment would come. She didn't look surprised, she looked terrified. "You need to stay inside," she whispered urgently. Her hand touched his arm, trembling. For the first time, Alaric didn't pull away. "You knew," he said, his voice low, cutting through the chaos rising in the street. Ophelie's lips parted, but she didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. She had known. She had been preparing. Maybe even bargaining with that stranger. The riders on the ridge stopped, their horses black shapes against the light. The leader raised an arm, signaling, and the men behind him spread wide, forming a shadow across the horizon. Townsfolk scrambled, some dragging children into cellars, others clutching rusty rifles as though courage could be pulled from old metal. Alaric's heart hammered. His project, his anger, his mistrust, all of it seemed small now, compared to the storm gathering at their door. He looked at Ophélie again. She was staring at the riders with a mix of dread and resignation, like someone who had been waiting for this day. The first gunshot cracked across the desert, sharp and merciless. The sound echoed through the town like a bell of doom. Alaric's blood ran cold. Saint-Roch's quiet life had shattered. The outlaws were coming. And in that moment, with fear pressing in on every side, he realized one truth. Whatever secret Ophélie carried was not just about her. It was about survival. The second shot came before the first had finished echoing. A bullet struck the bell tower of the chapel, shattering wood and raining splinters across the street. Screams rose as the townsfolk scattered, dragging children, clutching rifles, slamming doors. Horses thundered down the ridge, the outlaws charging like a storm of dust and steel. Alaric stood frozen in the workshop doorway, his heart pounding as the riders poured into Saint-Roch. The ground trembled beneath their hooves, and the air filled with the sharp smell of gunpowder. For a breath, it felt unreal, like some nightmare he couldn't wake from. Ophélie grabbed his arm, her nails biting through his sleeve. "Inside now," she cried, dragging him back toward the workshop. But Alaric resisted, torn between fear and fury. "You knew this was coming," he snapped. "What are you hiding from me?" Her face twisted with panic, but she had no time to answer. A gunshot ripped through the street, and a lantern shattered, flames leaping up the side of a wagon. The fire caught fast, feeding on dry wood and straw, spreading smoke across the square. Saint-Roch was no longer a town, it was a battlefield. Men with rifles fired from porches, their shots clumsy, desperate. Outlaws answered with deadly precision, cutting down anything that moved. The chapel bell, cracked by bullets, rang weak and broken with each strike. Alaric pulled Ophélie behind a stack of iron sheets in the workshop as bullets ripped into the walls, sparks flying. He could hear horses screaming, men shouting, women crying out for children lost in the smoke. The sound clawed at him, forcing him to face what he had refused for so long. His invention wasn't enough yet, but his hands, his courage, might be. Through the smoke, Alaric saw the outlaw leader, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, his coat long and black. He rode slowly, calmly, as if the chaos were nothing but a rehearsal. His eyes scanned the street, cold and certain. He wasn't here for random plunder. He was searching for something. And when his gaze lingered near Alaric's workshop, a chill ran down the boy's spine. Beside him, Ophélie stiffened, her breath catching. She knew him. Alaric could see it in her trembling face. The leader raised his hand and the gunfire slowed. Smoke swirled as his voice carried across the ruined square. "Bring her out," he called, his tone smooth, merciless. "You know who I want." His men circled, rifles raised, horses stamping. Alaric turned to Ophélie, shock flooding him. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she shook her head. "Don't listen," she whispered, clutching his sleeve. "Stay quiet." But the truth was clear in the firelight. The man wasn't here for Sandra. He was here for her. The air in Saint-Roch was thick with smoke, the heat of burning wagons pressing against the skin like a second sun. Alaric crouched low behind the iron sheets, every muscle tense. The outlaw leader sat tall on his horse, unmoving, his shadow stretching across the chaos. "Bring her out," he repeated, slower this time, his voice calm but edged like a blade. His men tightened their circle, rifles gleaming in the firelight. Alaric's stomach churned. He turned to Ophélie, his voice sharp and urgent. "What does he want with you?" Ophelie's eyes darted to the door, to the flames, to the men outside. "Not now," she whispered, shaking her head as tears streaked through the soot on her face. But her silence only fed his fury. "You've been lying to me," Alaric hissed. "All this time." She clutched his hand, the bandaged one, her grip desperate. "I was trying to protect you." Her words were raw, ragged, but they weren't enough. Protection meant nothing when the town was crumbling, when death was at their doorstep. He yanked his hand free. "Protect me from what?" Outside, the outlaw leader laughed, a sound low and cold. "Do you hear me, Ophélie?" he called, his voice rising above the crackle of fire. "You cannot hide. Not from me. Not from who you are." Alaric froze. The name. The certainty. He wasn't calling for some stranger. He knew her. Ophelie's face drained of color. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the dusty floor, her body shaking. "His name is Marcellin," she whispered at last, barely audible. "And once I belonged to him." The words struck like bullets. Alaric's mind spun, disbelief colliding with rage. Ophélie, his stepmother, the woman who had walked into their home with downcast eyes and soft words, had belonged to him? The scarred man who now burned their town to the ground? The room seemed to shrink, the smoke clawing down his throat. He wanted to shout, to demand more, but her tears silenced him. "I left him," she said, her voice breaking. "I ran. I thought he would never find me here." Her hands trembled as she clutched her dress. "But he has." The name Marcellin carried through the smoke like a curse. The leader raised his hand, and his men fired another round into the air, sending the townsfolk diving for cover. "This town is nothing to me," he shouted. "Give me Ophélie and I'll leave the rest." His words were like poison, splitting the square between fear and betrayal. Alaric's heart hammered. He could feel the weight of every eye, every scream, every drop of smoke pressing him toward a choice. He looked at Ophélie, broken and shaking, and for the first time in years, he saw not just the woman who had stepped into his father's place, but a woman hunted by her past, carrying a danger she had never spoken aloud. And for the first time, he wondered if his anger had blinded him to the truth all along. Smoke swirled like a living thing, curling through alleys, choking the sky. Marcellin sat tall in his saddle, his scar lit by firelight, his eyes locked on the workshop. "Search every house," he ordered, his voice cold as stone. His men scattered, boots pounding against wood, rifles banging on doors as they dragged terrified families into the street. The townsfolk begged, but mercy was not in these men's eyes. They were hunting not food, not gold, but one woman hiding in the shadows. Alaric pulled Ophélie deeper into the workshop, his chest tight, mind racing. The invention on the bench, half-finished gears and brass, mocked him. It was useless now, a dream too fragile for war. He grabbed a hammer instead, the familiar weight grounding him. "We can't stay here," he whispered. Ophélie shook her head, clutching his sleeve. "He'll kill anyone in his way," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "He'll burn this town to the ground until he has me." The guilt in her eyes cut deeper than the smoke. This is my fault. Alaric wanted to rage, to tell her she had doomed them all by keeping her past buried, but the sound of boots striking the dirt outside silenced him. A pair of outlaws kicked open a neighbor's door, dragging out an old woman by her hair. She screamed, clutching at the ground, until the butt of a rifle silenced her. Alaric's hands shook around the hammer. He wanted to charge, to fight, but he knew steel alone wouldn't stop a dozen guns. He forced himself still, listening to the chaos creep closer. Marcellin's voice rose again, echoing through the smoke. Ophélie, do not make me take these people's lives for your cowardice. His tone was sharp now, cutting through fire and screams like the edge of a knife. Ophélie sank to her knees, her face pale, her body trembling. Alaric knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. Don't you dare give yourself up, he hissed. He'll kill you whether you go or not. She shook her head. You don't know him. Her tears fell hot, leaving streaks through the ash on her cheeks. If I don't go, more will die. If I do, maybe he'll stop. The decision tore at the air between them, heavier than any bullet. Alaric's chest burned with fury, not just at Marcellin, but at the years of silence, the secrets that had led them here. Outside, the gunfire slowed, the outlaws closing in like wolves circling prey. And inside, the workshop grew suffocating, two souls bound by blood and betrayal waiting for the moment the door would break. The noise outside dulled for a moment, like the whole town was holding its breath. Alaric pressed his ear to the wall, every muscle taut, waiting for the next wave of boots and gunfire. Ophélie sat slumped on the floor, her hands clasped tight, her breath trembling as though the weight of years pressed on her chest. He turned to her, voice sharp, low. No more lies. Tell me what he wants. She looked up at him, her face streaked with soot and tears, and for the first time since she entered his life, she did not hide. I was young, she began, her words shaking but steady enough to cut through the silence. You think I chose this place, this life? No, I was taken. Marcellin found me when I was little more than a girl, and he kept me like a coin in his pocket, something he owned. Her hands shook as she spoke, fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. I cooked, I sewed, I smiled when he told me to, and when I couldn't smile anymore, he struck me until I did. Her voice faltered. I thought I would die there, in his camp, nothing but a shadow. Alaric's stomach twisted. He had seen Ophélie as an intruder, a thief of the place his mother once held, but never as this, a prisoner of another man's cruelty. How did you get away? He asked. Ophelie's gaze dropped to the floor. Your father? She whispered. He found me half dead on the road. He gave me food, shelter, a name that was not his to give but one he offered freely. He gave me safety. I thought Marcellin would never find me here. I was wrong. Her voice cracked. He always finds what he believes is his. The words filled the workshop heavier than smoke. Alaric's heart pounded, torn between grief and fury. His father had saved her, yet Alaric had treated her like a thief of love, never once asking what scars lay under her silence. The hammer in his hand felt small now, useless against the shadow that stalked her. So that's why he's here, Alaric muttered. Not for gold, not for land, for you. Ophélie nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. If I give myself up, maybe he'll leave. Maybe he'll spare them. The thought struck like poison. Alaric grabbed her wrist, shaking his head. No, you've given enough to him. Too much. If he wants you, he'll have to take you through me. His words burned, fierce and reckless, yet for the first time he meant them. Ophelie's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. But outside, boots pounded closer, wood splintered, and voices shouted orders. The hunt had reached their door. The workshop walls shook with the sound of boots and fists. Outlaws pounded at the door, rifles clanging against wood, voices shouting for Ophelie's name. Alaric gripped his hammer tight, every muscle burning with rage and fear. Ophélie crouched low behind the forge, her hands pressed to her mouth as if silence alone might keep death at bay. The boards of the door creaked, splitting under the weight of the men outside. Alaric's heart hammered in rhythm with every strike. He knew they had seconds, maybe less. With a roar, the door burst inward, splinters flying across the room. Smoke poured in with the men, three of them, rough-faced, eyes hard, rifles raised. The first stepped forward, boots crunching over broken wood, his gaze sweeping the shadows. She's in here, he barked. Alaric didn't wait. With a cry, he swung the hammer, catching the outlaw's jaw with a crack that echoed through the smoke. The man fell hard, his rifle skittering across the floor. The others shouted, raising their guns. Alaric dove behind the anvil, bullets sparking against iron. Ophélie screamed, her hands clutching at Alaric's arm as he dragged her lower. "Stay down," he shouted. His bandaged hand throbbed with every motion, but adrenaline drowned the pain. He grabbed the fallen rifle, fumbling with the unfamiliar weight. The outlaws closed in, boots striking sparks on the forge floor. "Come out, boy," one sneered, "or we'll burn you alive." Alaric's breath came hard, but he lifted the rifle, finger trembling on the trigger. He had shaped metal his whole life but never fired a gun. Tonight there was no choice. The first shot tore through the air, deafening in the small workshop. The outlaw staggered, clutching his shoulder, roaring in pain. The second lunged forward, swinging his rifle like a club. Alaric blocked with the hammer, sparks flying as wood and iron collided. The fight was messy, desperate, fueled not by skill but by fury. Ophélie grabbed a shard of broken wood and struck at the man's leg, buying Alaric the heartbeat he needed to bring the hammer down again. The outlaw crumpled to the floor, groaning. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by fire crackling outside. Two men lay groaning in the dirt, one unconscious, one bleeding. Ophélie knelt by Alaric, her hands shaking as she tried to steady him. "You'll get yourself killed," she whispered, tears streaking through soot. Alaric shook his head, chest heaving. "Better me than you." But his eyes drifted to the open doorway where smoke swirled, and beyond it, the dark shape of Marcellin still waited. The leader hadn't moved. He had sent pawns. Now he knew exactly where they were. And his next move would not be patient. Smoke curled into the night as the last of the groaning outlaws were dragged from the workshop floor. Alaric's chest rose and fell in heavy bursts, his arms trembling from the fight. Ophélie pressed her hand to his wound, trying to steady the bleeding. Then silence fell, a silence too heavy, too sharp. From the doorway, a tall shadow stepped into the light. Marcellin. His coat hung long and black, dust swirling at his boots, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over eyes that burned with cold fire. Behind him, the dying blaze of the burning corral painted the sky orange, casting him like a figure risen from the underworld. "Bravo," Marcellin's voice carried low, almost calm. He stepped over the broken doorframe, ignoring his fallen men as if they were scraps. "You've got steel in you, boy. Just like your father." Alaric's grip tightened on the hammer, still slick with blood. The words struck deep. He hadn't heard his father's name in years, not since whispers of betrayal had buried it. Marcellin's smile widened. "Didn't know, did you? You forged for me once." Same stubborn fire, same foolish loyalty. Ophélie stiffened, her eyes darting to Alaric's face. The hammer wavered in his grip. Alaric's voice cracked. "You're lying." But doubt clawed at his gut. Every story of his father had been wrapped in silence, shame filling the gaps. Marcellin circled the anvil like a predator, his boots echoing in the small space. "No lie, boy. Your father sold steel to both sides. Blood money. That's the truth you've been hammering against without knowing it. And now his legacy rests in you." His eyes flicked to Ophélie and a sneer spread across his face. "And in the woman who distracts you while you play at being a man." Rage burned hotter than the forge. Alaric lunged, hammer swinging, but Marcellin caught the blow with uncanny speed, twisting Alaric's wrist until pain shot through his arm. The hammer clattered to the floor. Marcellin shoved him back, the force sending him against the wall. Ophélie screamed, grabbing for the fallen rifle, but Marcellin's boot struck it away. He leaned close, his breath carrying the stink of smoke and whiskey. "You've got your father's fire," he whispered. "But fire without control? It only burns itself out." For the first time, Alaric saw death not as a shadow but a face inches from his own. And in that moment, something inside him broke, not from fear, but from clarity. Marcellin wasn't just an enemy. He was a mirror of everything Alaric could become if rage ruled him. His stepmother's hand on his shoulder grounded him, her touch trembling but steady. Marcellin saw it, his eyes narrowing with disgust. "Weakness," he spat. But as he raised his revolver, a sound pierced the air from outside, the tolling of the church bell. One strike, then two, then three. The town was awake. The town was coming. The bell's toll rolled across the valley like thunder, echoing off the canyon walls. Marcellin froze, his revolver half raised, eyes narrowing. From the distance came shouts, the thudding of hurried boots, the clatter of rifles pulled from racks long left untouched. Alaric staggered to his feet, blood streaking down his arm, his chest burning with every breath. Ophelie's hand clung to his sleeve as if her touch alone could keep him standing. The forge glowed faint behind them, casting their shadows long and fierce against the smoke. Through the doorway, townsfolk spilled into the street. First came Aloy the baker, apron smeared with ash, holding a rusty shotgun. Behind him, little Mariette clutched a lantern, her braids swinging as she ran. More followed, farmers with pitchforks, merchants with knives, women with fire in their eyes. They moved not as soldiers but as people with nothing left to lose. The bell tolled again, steady, unrelenting, and each strike seemed to hammer courage into their chests. Marcellin's sneer deepened. So the sheep think they're wolves. He fired into the air, the shot cracking like lightning, scattering sparks from the forge roof. The crowd faltered, fear flickering across their faces. But then Aloy shouted, his voice raw, "Not one step back." A cheer rose, uneven but strong, and the line of townsfolk pressed closer. Marcellin laughed, low and bitter, the sound chilling. "Do you think numbers make you brave? I've broken towns before. Yours will burn like the rest." He raised his revolver toward the crowd, steady and cold. Alaric lunged, knocking Marcellin's arm wide. The shot split the air, grazing the church steeple. They crashed together, fists and fury rolling through the dust. Ophélie screamed, snatching up the hammer, swinging with desperate strength. The blow missed Marcellin's head by an inch but sent him staggering. Alaric pushed to his knees, every bone aching, and met the outlaw's eyes in the haze. For the first time, Marcellin's grin faltered. The town was no longer silent. The bell no longer tolled for fear. It tolled for war. The church bell fell silent, but its echo lingered in every chest. The streets of Saint-Roch erupted as Marcellin's men poured from alleys and shadows, rifles flashing in the dark. The townsfolk surged forward, clumsy but fierce, their cries rising against gunfire. Sparks leapt from shattered windows, barrels overturned, flames licking at the night. Alaric stumbled into the street with Ophélie at his side, his hammer gripped tight, blood seeping into his sleeve. The air stank of smoke and powder, every heartbeat a drum of survival. Aloy fired first, his shotgun bucking against his shoulder, dropping a bandit in the dust. Mariette swung her lantern, smashing it across another's back, fire spilling bright. The crowd roared, pressing the outlaws back yard by yard. Yet Marcellin stood tall at the center, his revolver finding its mark with calm precision. Each shot cut the air like judgment, each strike reminding the town he was not merely a man but a storm cloaked in flesh. Alaric's gaze locked on him, the world narrowing to that single figure. Ophélie grabbed his arm. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice raw. But Alaric shook his head, eyes blazing. "This ends tonight." He charged, hammer raised, crashing through the fray. An outlaw swung at him with a rifle but Alaric ducked low, driving his shoulder into the man's gut before slamming the hammer down. The crowd parted in his wake, cries mixing with gunfire, steel and screams. For the first time, the townsfolk saw him not as the boy at the forge, but as a warrior of iron and fire. Marcellin turned, their eyes locking across the chaos. He holstered his revolver with a smirk, drawing a long blade instead, gleaming cruel in the firelight. "Let's see if the blacksmith's whelp can shape his own fate." The words sliced sharper than the steel itself. Alaric's grip tightened on the hammer, sweat streaking through soot, his father's ghost heavy on his shoulders. The distance between them closed with every desperate heartbeat, the battle fading into a blur of dust and blood around them. Then steel clashed with iron. The hammer rang against the blade, sparks spraying into the night. Marcellin's strength was monstrous, each swing forcing Alaric back, his arms screaming with every block. But Ophelie's cry cut through the roar, "Stand, Alaric!" And the crowd echoed her, voices lifting him, steadying his feet. He pressed forward, step by step, until the dust beneath them turned red. The fight for Saint-Roch had become a circle of fire around two men, one forged by greed, the other by blood and flame. The street burned like a forge. Flames licked the walls, smoke curled through the air, and the clash of steel rang out as Marcellin and Alaric circled each other. The townsfolk had fallen back, forming a wide ring around them. Ophélie stood at the edge, her face pale, hands trembling as she clutched a bloodied shawl. The world had narrowed to two men, one wielding a gleaming blade, the other a battered hammer stained with sweat and blood. Every eye in Saint-Roch held its breath. Marcellin struck first, his blade a blur, forcing Alaric to block hard. Sparks leapt, stinging his skin, the hammer groaning against the steel. Blow after blow rained down, Marcellin's grin widening with each clash. "You're slower than him," he taunted, his voice low and cruel. "Your father would have lasted longer." The words cut deeper than any steel, but Alaric gritted his teeth, refusing to give ground. With every swing, his muscles screamed, his breath ragged, yet something burned in his chest, a fire Marcellin could not extinguish. A sudden thrust drove Alaric stumbling back. Marcellin lunged again, blade grazing his ribs, tearing cloth and skin. Pain seared white-hot, but he stayed standing, hammer raised. Ophélie cried out, rushing forward, but Marcellin's boot kicked her aside. She crashed to the dirt, blood trickling at her temple. Alaric's vision blurred red. The world roared in his ears, not with fear, but with rage. His father's shame, his town's suffering, Ophelie's pain, it all ignited at once. The hammer felt alive in his grip, heavy as justice itself. He swung with everything left inside him. The hammer met steel, shattering Marcellin's blade in a spray of sparks. The outlaw staggered, shock flashing in his eyes. Before he could recover, Alaric struck again, the hammer crushing into his chest with a thunderous crack. Marcellin reeled, gasping, blood bubbling at his lips. For the first time his grin faltered. He dropped to his knees, clutching at his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. The man who had seemed immortal, untouchable, now knelt broken in the dirt of Saint-Roch. Alaric stood over him, chest heaving, hammer raised high for the final blow. Silence gripped the street, every soul waiting. Marcellin's lips twisted into a bloody sneer. Just like him, a killer. Alaric froze, the words like chains. Ophelie's broken voice cut through the smoke. No, Alaric. Not like him. Better than him. His arm trembled, the hammer hovering. Then slowly, with every eye watching, he let it fall not on Marcellin's skull, but to the dirt at his side. The outlaw crumpled, breath rattling as the town closed in to drag him away. Alaric had won not by killing, but by breaking the chain of blood. Morning crept over the valley, painting the ashes gold. The fires had burned low, leaving only smoke rising in thin gray ribbons. The town of Saint-Roch stood scarred but unbroken. Doors hung shattered, windows cracked, streets blackened, but people walked them still. The church bell, silent after its last desperate toll, gleamed faint in the sun as if blessed by survival itself. Alaric leaned against the forge doorway, the hammer at his side, its weight no longer a burden but a reminder. His ribs ached, his hands shook, yet his heart beat steady for the first time in years. Ophélie moved quietly beside him, her head wrapped in a bandage, her eyes tired yet alive. She touched his arm, her voice soft as falling ash. You stood when no one else could. Alaric shook his head, gaze sweeping over the townsfolk, clearing rubble, comforting children, sharing bread. We all stood, he whispered. For the first time he didn't feel like the lonely boy bent over a forge, unnoticed. He was part of something larger, bound not by shame, but by fire shared and endured. Marcellin was gone. Shackled, bleeding, dragged out by men who had once cowered at his name. The people had seen him broken, seen him fall, and with that sight, their chains shattered too. Yet Alaric knew his words would linger, echoes of his father's choices, shadows of legacy. But standing in the dawn, with Ophelie's hand in his, he felt the truth. He wasn't bound to repeat what came before. Steel could be reforged. So could a life. So could a town. Children ran past, chasing each other through the dust, laughter cutting through the silence left behind. The forge, though scorched, still stood. Alaric stepped inside, placing the hammer gently on the anvil. It was no longer just a tool of war, but a symbol of survival. He would shape not weapons but a future. The heat of the fire hummed steady, not consuming but creating. He breathed deep, the smell of smoke and iron filling him with strength. As the sun rose higher, Saint-Roch stirred with voices of hope. Where there had been fear, now there was courage. Where there had been silence, now there was song. And at the heart of it stood Alaric, no longer hidden in shadows, no longer silenced by shame. His father's ghost had been laid to rest, not by vengeance but by choice. He lifted Ophelie's hand to his lips, his voice a promise carried on the morning air. We'll build again, stronger, together. The hammer gleamed in the light, a beacon against the ashes.